Welcome to the town of Crediton in Devon, home of the Church of the Holy Cross and the Mother of Him who hung thereon. That is a unique dedication and one of the longest in the country, which is appropriate for a parish church which is 230 feet long. It's my privilege to serve here as rector, and as I come to pray and worship here, I can't help reflecting on the faith and lives of those people who through many centuries have built, restored and beautified this church, and those who have come here to pray and to mark significant moments in their lives. But this building, interesting and beautiful though it is no museum or monument. It is a building which is still used daily for prayer and worship, as well as for festivals and concerts. It tells a story of history and of present-day life and faith. I hope that you will enjoy learning more about the fascinating story of our parish church and what makes it important to the people of Crediton.
The history of Crediton Parish Church is a remarkable story, and one that can be traced back to the 8th century. During that time, it's been a cathedral for Devon and Cornwall, a collegiate church and a parish church. Today, its walls contain a wealth of historical treasures, and it stands as a testament to the community which surrounds it. The history of this church began in 739 AD, when Ethelherd, king of the West Saxons, granted land to Forthere, Bishop of Sherborne, for the foundation of a monastery at Crediton. When the diocese of Sherborne was divided into 4 smaller dioceses in the early 900s, we think it likely that Crediton's monastery became the site of Devon and Cornwall's new cathedral. The choice may have been influenced by the fact that St Boniface had been born here over 2 centuries before, with his memory being recalled throughout the very fabric of the church to this day.
Boniface was born in Crediton and he was called Winfrith when he was born here, but he felt God's call to go to spread the gospel among the people of Northern Europe. And in the end, because it was a very difficult situation over there with the pagan tribes, he had to get the Pope's permission. This was Gregory II. And it was the Pope who named him Boniface. He went on to have a very significant ministry and mission in the places we now call Holland and North Germany, and became Archbishop of Mainz, and in the end was martyred in Holland and buried back at his main monastery at Fulda in Germany. And so his legacy here is that we have strong friendships with these places on the continent, which means a lot to the people of Crediton.
In 1046, the 10th bishop, Leofric, was appointed, and he had grand plans for his cathedral. He quickly decided that the see should be moved to the more secure location at the centre of Exeter, which, with its old Roman walls, could be more easily defended from marauding Danes than the mere village of Crediton. In 2007, following a grant made by the Heritage Lottery Fund, a search for the site of the original cathedral was carried out using ground-penetrating radar. Although the final results showed evidence of old building work under the area of the south transept and the eastern part of the nave, heavy rainfall had made the ground so waterlogged that the radar images were indistinct. And with no clear evidence of any foundations of the Saxon cathedral, no excavation of the church building was allowed.
It would have been lovely to find the full footprint of the original Saxon cathedral, but I think what we have done is perhaps add evidence to the theory that the Norman construction and most of the church that you can see today is built on top of it. They've come along and reused the footings.
In 1050, the bishop's throne, the cathedra, was moved to Exeter, but Crediton's church continued, and in the early 12th century, a charter granted by the Exeter Bishop William Worrelwast, established a college of clergy here in Crediton, and the construction of a Norman church began, the foundations of that very same church that is here today. By 1150, the Collegiate Church was fully functioning, and this lead-lined square font is the oldest object in the church dating back to that time. The Collegiate Church was housed in a stone building which replaced the original wooden cathedral. Most of the surviving Norman building is in the lower part of the tower, such as these capitals on the piers and the two transepts. The church was rebuilt using a stone called volcanic trap. It's a bit like pumice and was frequently used throughout Mid and East Devon. The warm red exterior stone was quarried at Posbury, 3 miles away. The rest of the tower dates from the 13th and 15th centuries. The Collegiate Church was not a monastery. The senior clergy were called prebendaries, and none of them lived the communal life of monks. They were allocated a piece of land in the parish, a prebend, from which they drew a substantial income from rents and tithes. Prebendaries were allowed to be absent from the church, and very few of them ever lived in Crediton. Instead, they appointed modestly paid vicars to represent them. These vicars formed a community of clergy who lived in cottages near the church, attended to all the services, and acted as priests to churches and chapels in neighbouring parishes. At the end of the 14th century, the senior canon was appointed dean. His dwelling place was in the road opposite the south porch of the church, still known as Dean Street. Towards the end of the 14th century, bishops described the church as being in a state of disrepair, especially the nave. Their pleas for things to be put right were largely ignored, probably because Mid-Devon was never a wealthy area of England, unlike neighbouring Somerset that produced more wool. Fortunately, however, in the early 15th century, the church received a number of bequests, including a particularly large one from William Langton, who was canon of Exeter Cathedral and prebendary of Crediton. These brought in enough money to allow a complete rebuilding of the nave, choir and chancel areas in the perpendicular Gothic style of the 15th century. The present roof is the work of the 19th century restorers and has nothing of the magnificence of its 15th century predecessor. But all around us, in windows and this splendid wooden statue, are reminders of St Boniface. The stone used in the interior is another variety of volcanic trap, this time quarried in nearby Thorverton. The transepts were substantially altered and the upper part of the tower was rebuilt in the Gothic style. The sedilia, badly damaged during the Reformation, dates from the early 15th century, as does a recessed tomb in alabaster on the south choir aisle, which was probably the tomb of an early dean of Crediton. Above the tomb, a frieze has scenes from the life of Christ, from the Annunciation to the Ascension. During the rebuilding, a frieze of corbels was placed on each side of the nave. Finely carved in beer stone, these include what is today referred to as a green man, an ancient archetype that appeared in medieval times in ecclesiastical art throughout Europe. Even before this remarkable rebuilding program got underway, the church was a huge focus for people's faith from miles around. And this notable wooden carving commemorates a miracle which took place here in 1315. Thomas Gray, a fuller from Keynsham near Bristol, had been struck blind and was told in a dream to come to the church in Crediton, where he would regain his sight. This did indeed happen, right here while he was praying in St Nicholas's Chapel, now called the Friends' Chapel, just as Bishop Stapledon was saying Mass at the high altar. After various tests, Stapledon satisfied himself that a miracle had in fact occurred and ordered the ringing of the bells and a solemn celebration of thanksgiving to God. An account of the miracle appears in Stapledon's register for 1315, and this monument was put in place in the 1980s. This is the oldest monument in the church. This is the tomb of Sir John de Sully, who was made 39th Knight of the Garter in 1361, and his wife Isabel. Sir John is reputed to have lived until he was 106, and there is strong evidence in the National Archives to support this. A deposition he made in person to the Court of Chivalry in 1386, a year before his death, tells us that he was involved in campaigns against the French and the Scots, including fighting with the Black Prince at Crécy and Poitiers. Attached to the south aisle is an unusual building, especially for a parish church. The chapter house dates from the late 1200s, and the upper story, now known as the Governor's Room, is where the prebendaries and vicars of the College of Clergy met to discuss business, as well as keeping an eye on what was happening at the high altar. This room was also redesigned during the rebuilding of the church, and tests on the planking in 2004 revealed that the oaks from which it was cut were felled between 1434 and 1483. So these floorboards, inserted as part of the late Gothic reconstruction of Holy Cross, must have been trodden by the deans, canons and vicars of Crediton Collegiate Church around 600 years ago. In 1896, a bag containing nearly 2,000 silver coins from the 15 and 1600s was found hidden under the floor. Declared treasure trove, the church was allowed to keep some of these coins from Charles II's reign, and others were inset into the sides of this trinket box. But the collegiate churches in England weren't to last. Following the dissolution of the monasteries by Henry VIII, they too were dissolved and asset stripped as part of the English Reformation. Crediton's College of Clergy came to an end in May 1545. 2 years later, the townspeople of Crediton bought the church buildings for £200 from the king, shortly before he died. In that same year, Henry's successor, Edward VI, granted a charter establishing a corporation of 12 governors, whose job, ever since, has been to manage the church buildings. And it is the successors of those original 12 governors who still hold their business meetings in this very same room. The Charter of 1547 also established a grammar school, and when teaching eventually began in 1572, Queen Elizabeth's Grammar School's first home was here in the Lady Chapel, where it remained for almost 300 years. The blocked entrance, which was behind there, can still be seen from the outside. In 1860, the purpose-built school buildings were opened at the top of Crediton's High Street. Today, the Lady Chapel is used not only for worship, but also as a base for the church's choir. During the English Civil War, Crediton was under the control of both parliamentary and royalist armies, and the church was damaged by parliamentary soldiers who were billeted in the building. By the 1700s, the magnificent wooden roof, which had been in place for well over 300 years, was beginning to disintegrate. These medieval carved angels are all that survived from that time. The roof was replaced by a plaster ceiling, but in the mid-1800s, when so many English churches were being restored or rebuilt, the master mason, John Hayward, totally transformed Holy Cross. His workmen added new wooden ceilings for the nave, choir and side aisles. They stripped away the plaster that had covered every wall and repaired or renewed a lot of the stonework, transforming the building into what we see today. This heavily ornate memorial above the central arch was paid for by public subscription, and it commemorates Crediton's second most famous son, General Sir Redford's Buller, hero of the wars in Africa in the late 19th century and recipient of the Victoria Cross. Redford's Buller was a much-loved man, and at his funeral in 1908, the Crediton townsfolk, together with his tenants and many former soldiers, lined the 1.5-mile route from his home at Downs to Holy Cross. For over 900 years, the tower has been at the centre of Holy Cross Church, and above the ornately decorated ceiling lies the ringing chamber. An inventory lists 5 bells in the tower in 1545, and in 1774 a Cornish firm was commissioned to make a peal of 8 good, sound, tunable bells. It was these bells which could be heard ringing out across Crediton until 2004, when they were melted down and recast as 10. Then, in 2007, another 2 bells were added, and today all 12 ring out as one of the finest peals in the world. Music has been an important part of the life at Holy Cross since the Middle Ages. The north transept is home to a fine organ, and the long choral tradition of the church is maintained by a 50-strong choir.
Well, this organ was built in 1921 by the firm Harrison & Harrison of Durham. It's got about 2,500 pipes in all. Some of the pipes were recycled from an earlier instrument. The smallest pipe in the organ is about 1 inch, 2 inches long, and the largest pipe is 32 feet. The sound of the organ is rather like liquid honey. The pipes are all very well blended, all the different sounds, although there's a very wide range of colours. They're all in accord with one another, which is a particular Harrison speciality of the time.
Today, the path along the south side of the church leads to the Boniface Centre, a church office and set of rooms put aside for parish and community use. Just like improvements back in the early 15th century, this facility was funded by public subscriptions, including substantial donations from the Church of St Boniface in Sarasota, Florida, and from the town of Dockham in the Netherlands, where Boniface was martyred. It just goes to prove how, even in the 21st century, the influence of St Boniface is still being felt. Crediton Parish Church has been here in one form or another for over 1,300 years, from a simple wooden cathedral to a stone building that has been added to, rebuilt, renovated and repaired down the centuries. Today, in the 21st century, Holy Cross is as much a vibrant religious, social and cultural centre within Crediton as ever before. Every year it receives thousands of both British and foreign visitors who come to attend a range of festivals, concerts and art exhibitions, or, like me, who just simply want to come and explore this wonderful old church.